Welcome to Kendall and Cooper Talk Mysteries. I'm Julie Cooper, a thriller writer and half of the duo bringing you our regular podcast series, spotlighting mystery, suspense, and thriller fiction. First, a quick thanks to my brother Chris Squires for our wonderful theme song and his performance of The Man in the Panama Hat. Our theme for this episode is legacy, specifically the legacy of writers, but I'll get to that in a moment. I'm happy to introduce our guest, a highly regarded and highly awarded mystery writer. She's won the Agatha Award for her Urban New York series featuring police detective Sigrid Harald and the Edgar Award for Best Novel for Bootlegger's Daughter, which features legal sleuth Deborah Knott. She's also won the Anthony and the Macavity Awards. This writer has written over 31 novels and 2 collections of short stories. A long-standing member of the Mystery Writers of America, she's also been president of Sisters in Crime. Her book, Bootlegger's Daughter, was chosen as one of the 100 favorite mysteries of the century by the independent mystery booksellers. High praise indeed. Mystery Writers of America awarded her Grand Master status a few years back, and she's also been inducted into the North Carolina Literary Hall of Fame. For our mystery-loving listeners, if she's not already on your reading list, she certainly should be. Welcome, Margaret Maron. It's lovely to have you join us.
Thank you. It's fun for me to be here.
Oh, this is a treat. Now, I'm going to talk about legacy, but legacy is often closely tied to origin, especially in the South. Would you tell us about how growing up on your family's century-old farm and being a Tar Heel shaped you as a writer?
I think it gave me a rootedness, a sense of belonging that's tied to the land, but also to the people that I grew up with. We lived next door to my grandparents, and everybody seemed to be a storyteller in the family, in the extended family. And I remember long summer evenings swatting mosquitoes while sitting out on the porch swing and listening to the old-timers talk about long-gone people and also the local gossip about people who were still living in the neighborhood. And my grandmother liked to quilt, and I discovered, because I really did not need to be the center of attention, and I discovered that if I could sit under the quilt while the adults were putting the needle in and out and doing the quilting, I could hear things. They would forget that I was there, and I would hear stories that probably were not meant for young ears. But I do think that gave me a sense of storytelling.
Oh, what a great visual picture. I can just see a small girl sitting underneath the quilt hanging out and little ears wide open to every bit of gossip coming through.
Oh, yeah.
That's wonderful.
Oh, if they found me, I got chased out, of course.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. So the stealth mode of observation there. Well, I'm going to dive into legacy and writing and the connection between those later in this episode, but who do you count as your most important mentor?
You know, I understand the question. I do get it. But I have to say, I never took a writing course, and I never knew any writers until after I was publishing. So I would have to say that probably it was my husband more than anybody else. He's probably the most intelligent person that I've ever met. And he was my first reader, even though he doesn't particularly like fiction and certainly not particularly fond of mysteries. But he has a good ear for dialect and for logic, and he would put me back on track if I ever got off.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, that's a very different answer and a very interesting one, certainly. Now, you've written 2 successful series, one set in mostly rural North Carolina and one set in the very urban landscape and mean streets of New York City. I'm wondering, did you have to physically move yourself to New York to write so convincingly about that environment?
No, because I lived there for 10 years. My husband is originally from New York, and so we lived there. When we came back from Italy, we lived there for 10 years. So getting the feel of the city was no problem. But I have to say, I would never have written the Deborah Knott books had we stayed there. I needed to be back in this environment, in North Carolina, in the country, in rural, around farms and farmers and auto mechanics and just ordinary people in order to write those books.
Fascinating, fascinating. Well, what are the challenges for writers who seek to layer in multiple generations of family members, the way you have with your Deborah Knott series, without resorting to use a family tree at the front of the book? And I've got to say, those family trees in the family saga novels kind of irritate me, but I do realize why they're necessary. But you didn't need that for what you wrote. How do you do that? How, as a writer, do you adjust
you
for
haven't
that
looked at my books very. You have not looked at my books very closely, because I do have a family tree at the beginning of
them. Do you?
Not with
I've
the very
missed that
first
one.
one.
Oh, okay.
Not with the very first one, not with Bootlegger's Daughter, because we were just getting started. But after that, I mean, Deborah Knott is the youngest child of her father's second marriage. She has 11 older brothers. All of the brothers have been married at least once, and some of them 3 times. All of them have children.
Mercy.
So without a family tree, how in the world would you keep track of it? In fact, one of my all-time favorite books, you say family trees annoy you, but Rumor Godden's China Court is one of my favorite go-to comfort reads. And if it hadn't been for that family tree at the beginning, I don't think I would have gotten past the first chapter, because the generations are layered. So even with a very small family, you need to keep reminding your readers of the relationship if you don't have a family tree at the beginning. You just, it doesn't have to be, well, as you know, Bill is my brother. No, you don't do that. But you say, my brother Bill came into the room, and that takes care of it.
Okay, so subtle reminders of what those dynastic relationships are always help the reader very much so. Okay. Now, you touched on this briefly when you talked about moving from New York City to North Carolina, how you just had to be on the land. Nature and the changing seasons are a distinct force in the Deborah Knott series and form an immersive experience for the reader, even for someone who's not familiar with the Southeast. You've melded the land, the crops, the growing cycles, all of it's beautifully layered into your work. Any writing tips for someone trying to write about a place where they didn't grow up?
Well, I would wonder why someone would do that, unless it's a historical and you need to set it somewhere. I don't know. I would say that try to visit your setting if you possibly can, and note what you can hear and smell. I mean, you have 5 senses, and sight is only one of them. So you need to bring in the other 4 to get that sense of place. Now, of course, the internet can take you anywhere. And so you need to do your homework. You can see what's blooming when, at what time, what crops are being harvested. Or if it's an urban area, you can look at the holidays that are happening around that are important to that area, or the buildings. But you want to try to avoid giving your readers an information dump. That can be very boring.
Right. And I know sometimes you can tell reading a book when the author literally has never set foot in that geographical setting, which I think is really disappointing for a reader. But you've obviously, not only done the homework, but you've lived there, so.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that's always been amusing to me as a Southerner growing up was how badly people outside the region did not understand you all. They thought that it was, that it's singular. It's not. You all, it's always plural. Even when you're just speaking to one person, when you say you all or y'all, you're talking about not just that person, but the person's family or their spouse. When we say, can y'all come over for Sunday dinner? We're not just talking to you personally. We're talking to your whole family. Can everybody come for Sunday dinner? And it used to really annoy me when they would show a voluptuous blonde looking dreamily into the hero's eyes and saying, well, why don't you all just light my cigarette? I just wanted to throw up.
Well, thanks for that. I actually got schooled properly on the use of you all when I went to a writer's workshop in Charleston and then finally got the distinction of what that really meant. Thank you for that.
Some people also think that all y'all is the plural, but it's not. Y'all is the plural. It always is, and just the plural. And as the poem says, when we speak of only one, we just say you, like you all.
Right. Oh, thank you for that. Now, I know you've been deeply involved over your career with several writing organizations and have received many awards. Could you tell us more about one award that I think is very important to you, which is the North Carolina Literary Hall of Fame?
That one was amazing to me. I never expected to be there. I had received the North Carolina Award for Literature a few years earlier, and that is the highest civilian honor that the state awards. And that I thought would be the absolute peak. But then when they said that they were going to put me in the Literary Hall of Fame, that was just icing on the cake. The hall is physically located in Southern Pines at Weymouth, which is a historical house that belongs to the North Carolina Writers Conference, and they're the ones who nominate and induct you into the Hall of Fame. And there are pictures going back to, oh, jeepers, I forget who the first one was, but it goes back over 100 years of writers that are in this Hall of Fame. So, yes, it meant quite a lot to be included with them.
It's quite an honor. So do you get a bronze bust or a medal, or what do you get for that?
You don't get it. Well, actually, I did. I got a beautiful piece of pottery from one of the well-known potters here in North Carolina.
Oh, lovely.
Yes. So that was what they gave that year. For the North Carolina Award, I actually get a medal on a long tricolored ribbon. That's pretty important, yes, and fun.
Right, quite the coup. Now, this probably isn't a question you can answer, but I'm going to try anyway. Margaret, with 31 books now to your credit, which one is your favorite? Or would that be like asking a mother which child you love the most?
Well, it is a little bit, because I always hate my books when I'm writing them. And when I first finish them, I don't think they're any good. And it's only after I get a little distance of at least a year on it, I start thinking, well, that one wasn't bad. But probably my favorite one to research and write was Slow Dollar, which I forget where it falls in I think it's the 9th in the series. And that's set against a small town carnival. And the way that came about is I got a letter from somebody writing from New York, from upstate New York, but it had a return address of Florida on it. And she said, you don't know me, but I'm your third cousin once removed. And she had the whole genealogy that she put down. And yes, if what she had written was correct, she was my third cousin once removed. And she said, I would love to come by and meet you sometime on our way back to Florida. Would that be okay? And she said, oh, and by the way, we own a carnival. And I'm going, what? I mean, I am a writer. Am I going to say no to a carnival?
Sure.
So she
came I don't think so.
And we talked for about 3 hours, and she told me all about what carnival life, small town carnival life. I mean, this is not a big Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey. This is just a shabby little carnival. And it travels with 2 or 3 rides and no animals, and and a lot of the games of chance and everything. And she explained about how you know if you have a chance of winning. If the prizes are very small and cheap, then you will probably win one. But if it's the giant teddy bear or a piece of electronic equipment, forget about it. You're never going to win it. You're just not.
I
And
see.
she explained to me how it worked. They call it gaffing the game. And she told me about how the ways some of the games are gaffed. And it was just fascinating to me. So I set the murder mystery in this small carnival. But what also made it my favorite, I think, is because the sheriff's deputy finally proposed to her. Now, I did not intend for Deborah to get married, and I certainly did not intend for her to marry this particular guy. I would have given him a sexier name. I mean, Dwight is a nice, solid name, but it's not very sexy, is it? I mean, like Jason, Adam, or... But my readers started saying, when is Dwight going to realize that he's not one of Deborah's brothers? And when is Deborah going to realize he's not one of her older brothers? And in Slow Dollar, he proposes, but it looks like it's going to be a marriage of convenience. It's just because, she's in her 30s now, and none of her relationships have worked out. He's divorced. He's got a kid. He just wants a place. So he tells her that he's tired of bachelor shopping and cooking for one. He wants a place that he can bring his son to if when his ex-wife gives him permission to take the child. So it looked like it was just going to be a marriage of convenience. They liked each other, but they certainly not on Deborah's part ever had any ideas of a romance with him. So anyhow, that is why I think I like this book, why I have a soft spot in my heart for this book.
That's
nice. All right.
Well,
Well, I'm definitely going to look for that one. Wonderful. Well, Margaret, what's next on the writing horizon for you? Any tips you can give us or hints about a future book?
Well, no, I do not plan to write another book. I don't plan to. Now, you never know, never say never. But I do think that I have wound up both series. I began my career with short stories. I sold short stories for the first 8 or 9 years. Did not think I could write a book. In fact, it still startles me to realize I've written 30-odd books. But short stories, I started with short stories, and that's what I'm returning to. In fact, this year,
wonderful.
Ellery Queen has already published 2 of them this year.
Okay.
I just don't want any more deadlines.
I can sort of relate to that. Yes. Yeah. All right. So look for more short stories from you, definitely. And Margaret, I believe you're going to give our listeners a brief reading selection today. What are we going to hear?
Well, this is from the last Deborah Knott book, Long Upon the Land.
Excellent.
One of the reasons that I wrote this book, I thought maybe I had finished with her story, but I realized that I had never explained how a small-town debutante from the upper crust of that small town wound up marrying the semi-illiterate son of a bootlegger. He himself was a bootlegger, and that's why she's a bootlegger's daughter. But anyhow, so this book explains how it happened. Daddy's never been one to talk about his feelings for our mother, who died of cancer when I was 18. But I know how deep the hurt goes. We all know. He'll smile with the rest of us when we talk about her. The house parties that lasted for days. The way she could play any song she'd ever heard. The way she lured his best looper away from the barn with better wages than he'd been paid. The way she teased that she fell in love with his 8 little boys before she fell in love with him. But we knew not to probe deeper than those light-hearted family legends and anecdotes. Mother probably would have told me about their courtship had I been mature enough to ask. But I was as self-centered as any teenager back when she was dying, more interested in whether to go to a ball game with the team captain or with the coach's son. The boys were all off starting their own lives that summer. College, new jobs, marriage, having babies, and all of them were unnerved by her losing battle with death. Daddy was in such fierce denial that he drove himself to exhaustion for farm work. And even though Mother was dying, I couldn't help feeling sorry for myself. It seemed monstrously wrong that her day-to-day care fell squarely on me. I was supposed to be looking forward to college, not mired in bedpans and soiled bed linens and torn between grief and guilt. I know now that those last 2 months were a gift, and more than once I've wished that I'd listened closer or asked more questions. But she and Daddy had been so right together, it had never occurred to me to wonder how she could have married a roughneck bootlegger in grade school and who had 8 little boys to boot. She was a privileged town girl. Had it not been for the war, she would have made her debut in Raleigh wearing long white gloves and a virginal white ball gown. He grew up in rural poverty, the son of a small-town moonshiner. Her father was a prominent attorney whose associates tried to get him to run for governor. His father had died in a car crash while running from a bunch of revenuers. She had studied Latin in high school. He spoke the Queen Anne's English, as filtered through 300 years of informal usage. She was forever correcting our grammar, although she never completely broke the older ones from using double negatives. None of us could get away with saying ain't in her hearing. It's not fair, Adam once grumbled. Daddy says ain't all the time, and you never correct him. When you're the man your daddy is, you can say whatever you like, she told him. Till then, you're fixing to go to bed without your supper if you keep arguing about it.
Oh, lovely. Thank you for that. That was wonderful.
Wow,
So
what a
wonderful.
great piece of writing. That's a great model. Wow, there's so much to pull out of that. Great lines. This is Wendy Kendall, the other half of the Podners, and I'm the cozy writer. And now I've got a few questions for you, Margaret.
Uh-huh.
All right.
Okay.
Amidst some thoughtful, dire, and action-packed issues that get handled in your books, there's also some playfulness in some of your characters. For example, in Bootlegger's Daughter, and for listeners who haven't read this wonderful mystery yet, it includes a run for a local election. And there's a scene during a primaries party. Protagonist Deborah Knott goes out to the side terrace for a conversation with another character. And as Deborah narrates, she gets out to the side terrace first, quote, I'd shed my jacket and changed earlier into a more festive skirt, but I still wore my red patent heels, and they glistened in the moonlight. I tapped my heels together lightly, experimentally, and looked up to see Stevie watching. He grinned. Does it feel like Oz? Why do you write this kind of whimsy, sometimes wistfulness, too, into your characters?
Well, I think we need that humor. I love to laugh at jokes, and I love good stories, and I expect my readers to do the same. I am not writing blood and gore thrillers. I don't do that. I like the softer side of the mystery, not the terribly cozy, but certainly more toward cozy than toward the down the main street books. And also, I was lucky enough to meet some district court judges when I first started this series, and they have given me such great stories over the years. Some of them are so funny, and some of them are sad. I mean, like when you do a divorce court, for instance, and you have the equitable distribution of marital goods. I had one judge tell me that she had seen their couple's special needs daughter listed in that category of things that neither of them wanted. I mean, that would break your heart.
Oh.
But then there's the arguing over a spatula or the wedding album. The marriage is breaking up, and they're arguing over who's going to get the marriage album. It's just, these are the kind of things I just love to put in the books.
They're real glimpses into human nature, aren't they?
Yes.
Your writing has a wonderful, almost a rhythm to the sentences and paragraphs. And I'm sure your listeners agree now after just hearing that excerpt that you read. Can you talk a little about this as part of your author's voice and How have you developed and revealed your voice? Is that something that's consciously done?
And I don't think it's consciously done on my part, but the fact remains is before I was a short story writer, I wanted to be a poet. And I love poetry. And the poet that I love the most is Edna St. Vincent Millay. I think I learned more about writing from her than from reading how-to books, because she gives you a wonderful sense of place. She's very specific when she's writing in her poetry, for instance. She doesn't just say that, I walked out into my herb garden. She'll say, even you, sweet basil, even you, lavender, now's the time for you to, do your thing and leave me alone because I have other things to do, writing poetry, for instance. And you're immediately into that herb garden and you're smelling the lavender and you're smelling the parsley and the basil. I think it's that specific, the sense of the specific that probably has informed me. But also, I just like the rhythm of poetry. And I guess a little of it seeps over into that.
It certainly does. It's beautiful. In the beginning of your book, Bootlegger's Daughter, there's a court case that Deborah Knott watches while she's waiting for her client's case. And it has to do with a black plumber pulled over for drunk driving. And not only the sentence that's handed down, but the reasons why the sentence. As part of what Deborah says, quoting here, punishment is supposed to deter a person from doing it again, not crush his spirit. Can you talk about the significance of this trial on the actions Deborah takes, and also the idea in your story of tempering justice with mercy?
Well, the immediate effect of her hearing that case and being so incensed by it because it was such an unfair thing. I mean, the judge was a bigot, and he just let it all loose and poured out all kinds of horrible things for this poor plumber who had accidentally driven while drunk. I mean, not drunk, but he had had a couple of drinks, enough to trigger the breathalyzer. But he hadn't gone out deliberately to do it. He got a call from his sister saying that her car had broken down and could he come and fetch her, and it was a cold, rainy night, and he did. And there happened to be a patrolman that was just waiting to stop somebody driving while black. So the immediate effect is she went right out and registered to run for judge. So that was the tipping point. She really had not planned to run for office, but she wanted to make a difference. And she knows that she's not perfect. And she knows from growing up with all those roughneck brothers that things happen. And the nice thing about the law is it does offer some flexibility. Deborah Knott is working class, and so she can appreciate fair play and knows that, that the misdemeanors and felonies are not always deliberate. And when she can, she does try very much to temper justice with mercy.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, thoughtful idea in the book. Your Deborah Knott series is filled with action that really keeps me turning pages. I was interested to see that it's written in first person, and Deborah Knott is taking me along with her in present tense as things are happening. What are some of the challenges and advantages of writing in first person present tense?
Well, I have to say, I think that it might be a shortcut sometimes. I use it as a shortcut sometimes because if you're talking to someone, you don't have to explain or describe where you are and what you're doing. I mean, just what you choose to say and tell will give that background and give that setting. So I think in a way it is a shortcut, but it also gives you a sense of immediacy, I think. You're inside her head, and she can be flip or she can be serious. and she does waver back and forth. I mean, she has the preacher sitting on one shoulder and the pragmatist sitting on the other shoulder, and it's like the devil and the angel. In fact, one of my readers gave me a set of Donald Ducks, and one is a devil and one is an angel, and they're magnetized so that I could set them on my shoulder if I cared to, which really delighted me.
Beautiful.
And so Deborah has these two voices in her head all the time. And one of them says, you should do good. And the other voice says, well, yes, but if we can also do ourselves a little good at the same time, maybe. So that's the advantage, I think.
Yeah, she's a wonderful character. In The Bootlegger's Daughter, again, the chapters are given, each of them are given a quote from, and I think all of them are from country music songs. And I just love those quotes. They are. Oh, yeah. I just love those quotes. And I'm not normally, that's not like my go-to music, but boy, did they fit those chapters. It was beautiful. And in Long Upon the Land, another Deborah Knott mystery, the chapters are given quotes from the Bible. What inspired you to use these quotes for chapter heading, not chapter headings, but for chapters? And also, do you have a favorite country music song or artist?
Okay, that's a lot of questions. Let's see. I do it because it amuses me, quite frankly. I grew up reading some of my grandmother's old books, and they always had Latin chapter captions at the beginning of each chapter, or French, which I didn't know either. And it was always fun to try to sound it out and figure it out. But they amuse me. And the country songs are because that's what Deborah loves. And you ask about who's my favorite. Well, let's go back to the Bible first. I use the Bible quotes in Long Upon the Land because that comes from honor thy father and thy mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God hath given thee. That's one of the commandments. Don't ask me which one. And I thought, since I'm writing about it, this book is about her parents and much about her mother, who was the central character in the courtship. And it just seemed appropriate to use it. But the country music songs, I wanted to say who sang them or what the titles of the songs were. But my editor then wouldn't let me. She said it was a matter of copyright, or she was afraid that it might get into copyright things, and she didn't want to do that. If I were doing it again, though, I know that I could certainly give the title, if not anything else. But you ask about a favorite country music song or artist. Well, I'm going to tell you, anything Willie Nelson or Waylon Jennings ever sang. That's my kind of it.
All right. Little insight.
I do like opera. I'm not going to say that I don't like classical too. But I grew up listening to WCKY Cincinnati, and those kind of, that was the music, the Grand Ole Opry, and all of those classic country singers. And then, as I say, Willie Nelson, his voice makes me melt. I just love his voice.
It's great. And those songs really are stories too, you know? I mean, it's
yes.
Cool that way. Yeah, it all fits.
Yeah.
Your books have been translated into 17 different languages. As the author, how involved do you get to be in those translated books? And have you been surprised at all at some of the response from the readers of the translated books in other countries, for example, their reaction to contemporary Southern mystery literature?
Well, I'm not really involved at all in the translation. That's what my agent does that. The only time I was contacted by a Japanese translator was she wanted to know what a yellow dog Democrat was. And so I had to explain that.
Oh.
But the funniest thing in translation for me was the blurb that the Germans quoted. When the book came out in English, several people had written nice things. But Barbara Mertz, who writes as Elizabeth Peters, had written, Margaret Maron is a wonderful writer. Read her. That's an order. And that was the only thing that they quoted. Read her. That's an order.
Wow.
I felt like saying, Achtung. Yeah, very
Wow.
dramatic.
Oh, no.
The theme of family is strong. In particular, can you talk a little about the parent-child relationship in your book, Bootlegger's Daughter? Because you explore the theme of family through several different characters, and many aspects of this relationship are explored in that book.
Yeah. When the book opens, Deborah is at odds with her father. I mean, they have not really spoken or been close since she came back to Colleton County. And he did not want her to run for judge, and because he thought that she would hear things that a lady shouldn't have to hear in court. There would just be too much vulgarity and meanness and evil, and his little girl didn't need to hear that. And, of course, she doesn't want to be treated like anybody's little girl, set up on a pedestal or put behind glass. So they had not been talking with each other for the last few years. But in this book, they do reconcile. But where she's actually living, she's not living out at the farm. She's living in town with her mother's sister, her Aunt Zell, and her husband. And as she says, Aunt Zell is mother with the rough edges off, because Aunt Zell is, well, you know, in the South we have a phrase, you know, a person can be a good person, but a good old gal is something else. So, or a good old boy is something else. So Deborah's mother was a good old gal, but Aunt Zell is a good woman, but she acts as Deborah's mother in the book. So there's a lot of looking at different parental type relationships throughout all the books, as a matter of fact.
Well, thank you so much for answering my questions. And Julie, I think you've got a segment you want to talk a little bit about legacy.
Sure. And it starts with a question of what's your legacy? And Margaret writes with an insider's knowledge in her Deborah Knott series of the legacy of Southern culture, the land, the history, the issues of race, family secrets, and often troubled inheritance. Her mystery series and an earlier interview with writer David Morrell got me thinking about the word legacy and what it truly means. David spoke with great respect of his three mentors when he was starting out, and though they're all gone now, he continues to mention their names in every interview and article to honor them and their legacy. If you missed our earlier episode, his mentors were Sterling Silliphant, a brilliant screenwriter, Philip Klass, who also was actually called William Penn, and John Barth. Speaking their names is a way to honor their achievements and their impact on him, a way of giving back. Val McDermott, another outstanding mystery writer, spoke to us last year about how writers need to pay it forward, and she actively does by teaching at workshops, making appearances in schools, and awarding and funding scholarships to budding writers. I just completed the last revisions on a murder mystery whose essence can be distilled down to just one word, legacy. I looked at the ways people define legacy and exactly how far some will go to protect that legacy. Some people define legacy as fame, money, military rank, academic achievement, material goods, or family. I heard an interview with Oprah Winfrey last week where she quoted one of the simplest and best definitions I've ever heard, and this came from her mentor, the late Maya Angelou. Maya said to Oprah, "Your legacy is every life you touch." Whether you're working hard to write the best book you possibly can, or teaching journalism to a bunch of rambunctious high school students, like one of my mentors did many years ago, thanks, Mr. Oside, or volunteering to help a struggling young reader in an eager reader program in an elementary school, or even working in an adult literacy program, there are lots of opportunities around you to build your legacy, however you define it. As the scientist and health researcher Jonas Salk the man who developed the polio vaccine, once said, "Are we being good ancestors?" Something to think about. Over to you, Wendy.
Thanks, Julie. Well, the mystery of life and legacy. In keeping with the sentiments of Bootlegger's Daughter, the country song chapter quotes, here's my wish for everyone. Someday I hope you get the chance to live like you were dying. I can't say it more beautifully than Tim McGraw with his heartfelt song, Live Like You Were Dying. Talk about great writing. Just listen to these words.
I asked him when it sank in that this might really be the real end. How's it hit you when you get that kind of news? Man, what'd you do? And he said, I went skydiving, I went Rocky Mountain climbing, I went 2.7 seconds on a bull named Blue Manchu, and I loved deeper, and I spoke sweeter, and I gave forgiveness I've been denying. And he said, someday I hope you get the chance to live like you were dying. He said I was finally the husband, and most of the time I wasn't, and I became a friend would like to have. And all of a sudden going fishing wasn't such an imposition, and I went 3 times that year. I lost my dad. Well, I finally read the good book, and I took a good long hard look at what I'd do if I could do it all again. And then I went skydiving, I went Rocky Mountain climbing, I went 2.7 seconds on a bull named Blue Manchu, and I loved deeper, and I spoke sweeter, and I gave forgiveness I've been denying. And he said, someday I hope you get the chance to live like you were dying. Like tomorrow was a gift, and you got eternity to think about what you do with it. What did you do with it? What did I do with it?
Wow. Okay. I love that song.
Thanks for sharing that, Wendy.
Love that song.
That's great.
One thing that
You
can't...
didn't give me a chance.
Go ahead.
Well, you asked about. You didn't give me a chance to say what I thought my legacy was.
Oh, great question.
Please
Great
tell
question.
us. Yes.
Well, I just wanted to say, I have taught and I have lectured and answered a lot of questions for beginning writers, but I think probably my biggest legacy is I was one of the founding members of Sisters in Crime, and I was its 3rd president. And I have to say, there was so much opposition to us at the beginning that I spent a lot of time, explaining and saying the fact that we were pro-women did not mean we were anti-male. And I lost at least 1 book, if not 2, during those 2 years that I was so actively involved with Sisters in Crime. So I would like to think that the fact that it still survives and it's giving so many women encouragement to write mysteries, if I have a legacy, maybe that's it.
That's beautiful, Margaret, because that's a great
Wonderful.
organization.
Yeah, we're very proud of it.
Well, I'm going to go on to recommend a book that has a legacy element to it. I'm going to recommend the Maggie Hope Mystery Series by Susan Elia McNeil. You can dive into this series of books at any point, but don't cheat yourself out of any of the engaging, can't put it down's World War II mystery spy thrillers. Start with Mr. Churchill's Secretary and then read Princess Elizabeth's Spy and then His Majesty's Hope and so on. The latest edition is The Paris Spy, and the next is available in August of this year. This series came to mind to recommend with today's legacy theme, thinking of the legacy from the World War II greatest generation. This author writes novels about the English battle during World War II. The heroine is Maggie Hope, a young American woman in London in 1940. She begins working at Bletchley Park, Winston Churchill's secret intelligence and computers headquarters. There we're introduced to secrets, daring, and a diverse group of interesting characters. Maggie excels in math and logic, but it's her code-breaking skills that prove especially useful in the war effort. Her pursuits draw the reader into spy rings, assassination plots, and the London bombings and rationing of World War II. It's thrilling reading, loved by all ages from young to my 99-year-old mother, who was about Maggie Hope's age when she lived in England during the war. My mother loves this series of books and praised how it vividly brings back so many memories of what life was like then. The history is ingeniously woven into these action-adventure mysteries. While working passionately for the Prime Minister and England, Maggie is also wrestling with family issues, searching for her lost father and the mystery surrounding her mother. There's also romance amidst the war and rubble. Reading about Maggie's close group of friends and housemates, you find that each of them has interesting lives and side stories as well. The first book will lead you right into Maggie's next assignment, guarding against a threat to the young Princess Elizabeth, and the continued developments in the other characters' lives. Then, on to His Majesty's Hope, where Maggie continues her espionage work, but this time she's on assignment where she parachutes into Berlin. Maggie Hope is a logical, practical, courageous, smart, resourceful, passionate young woman. You'll participate in the search for clues, attempt to break secret codes, and you'll work alongside her to solve these mysteries. This is a great series, along with Margaret Maron's books I definitely also recommend. Margaret, what would you recommend to our listeners?
Well, I'm going to go back to a classic writer, Josephine Tey. I think Brat Farah is very good. The central character is Brat Farah. He's a young man who tries to insert himself into the family who has raised purebred racehorses for several generations by pretending to be the long-lost heir and twin brother to the current heir by default. A close family friend who was down on his luck has coached Brat to perfection, and everybody accepts him except his twin, who claims that he can sense that this is his brother. The original and older twin disappeared, and everyone assumed that he committed suicide by swimming out to sea. But Brad explains that the note that was found with the teenager's jacket was not a suicide note, but a running away note, and that he managed to get to America, where he fell in love with horses on a western dude ranch. When he came back to England and learned about this very English stud farm, that it's a lovely, suspenseful cat and mouse game. But even though Brat's trying to steal an inheritance, he's so decent and likable that you can't help rooting for him. I highly recommend it.
Oh, that sounds great. Thank you. I've read her other book that she's best known for, perhaps, but I'm going to definitely look that one up. And I've got a quick film recommendation today for the new film Ocean's 8. And this film's been heavily promoted as a continuation of heist movies with all-star cast based on the Ocean's 11 franchise. While I love the all-star cast, including Kate Blanchett and Sandra Bullock, I wondered if the plot would hold up. There were elements I really enjoyed, such as the span of ages and diversity of the female characters, from Rihanna and Awkwafina to Sandra Bullock to veteran actors including Marlo Thomas and Mary Louise Wilson. The plot, including a couple of twists, mostly holds together and the high-tech gadgets are very impressive, especially that 3D printer. Now I want one. Since the heist is set at the Met Gala, you can imagine the clothes are to die for. I did hope for two things I didn't get out of this film: the sense of sisterhood with sarcastic banter, the kind of thing that made Ocean's 11 with Clooney and Pitt so enjoyable, and, honestly, a bit more darkness, featuring more conflict, tension, and texture between the main characters, which would have added to its appeal. The film is restrained by the limits of the Ocean's 11 franchise, and in some cases lacks the wit of the original. But hey, it's summer fun. I've got to single out Anne Hathaway's hilarious take on celebrity as the cliched Hollywood narcissist starlet. She gives a kind of screwball comedic performance with a wink, and James Corden in a small role is a delight. I think you'll enjoy it. In closing, our special thanks to an expert storyteller, award-winning writer, and bestseller Margaret Maron for spending time with us today and answering all our questions. We're so happy you could join us for a chat. Keep reading and keep writing.